Let's just get this over with.
In John 8:58, it's recorded, Jesus said to them, "Most assuredly, I say to you, before Abraham was, I am." Does this mean Jesus said he's God? I'm Bob Pauline, and welcome to the program, That's in the Bible. You know, dear friends, some believe that Jesus taught that he is God in John 8:58, but we here in the Church of Christ, we do not believe that. Why not? Let's delve into this together. We received these comments and questions on YouTube regarding this topic. First was, please help me to ask him about John 8:58. Before Abraham was, I am. Thank you, Kamsi. Kamsi was not the only one, though, who had a concern about what's recorded there in John 8:58. Let's read another YouTube comment which reads, before Abraham was, I am. So Jesus seems to think he was Jehovah. See John 8:58. That's good enough for me. Let's find out together, first, what is actually written in that verse, John 8:58. So let's go to it.
Yes, let's go to multiple translations and versions of the Bible to make it seem like that the Bible is saying what I'm teaching here.
And together, let's read that. John 8:58. Jesus said to them, most assuredly, I say to you, before Abraham was, I am. So let's first state the obvious, which is that the verse does not say that Christ is God.
So your argument is that since the verse doesn't say in these exact words, I am God, therefore it's not saying that he's God. Are you a Muslim?
And as we learned, dear friends, from previous lessons, we're not allowed to just inject our own opinion. So let's frame our response then around these two main concerns. Christ's phrase, before Abraham was, I am, allegedly means that he existed before Abraham, and others use this then as evidence that Christ is therefore God. So our first question will be, in what way is Christ before Abraham?
Well, that's an easy one. He was the pre-incarnate Christ, the Son of God, which is exactly what the text implies because Jesus is identifying himself as the great I am.
And the second interpretation that many have is that by Christ saying, I am, he allegedly is saying he is God. Because God said, I am in Exodus 3:14. So our second question then is to be this. Is the I am that Christ said the same as the I am that God said? To begin with, what then did Christ mean when he said, before Abraham was, I am? Now, we cannot go along with the interpretation that he existed as a person before Abraham. Why not? Because the Bible doesn't teach that.
Okay, so I'm going to give my own argument here a little bit before we move on, just to show that this is definitely saying that Jesus is identifying himself as God. Read the next verse, all right? In fact, also read the verse previously, verse 57. Then the Jews said to him, you are not yet 50 years old, and you have seen Abraham? And then Jesus answered, most assuredly I say to you, before Abraham was, I am. And then he answers the question, and then read verse 59. Then they took up the stones to throw at him, but Jesus hid himself and went out into the temple, going through the midst of them, and so passed by. Why would they throw stones at him for saying that if he's not claiming to exist before being born? What's so bad about just saying I am? The only logical explanation is that he's saying he is I am in the sense that God is. Okay?
It does teach, however, that Christ is Abraham's seed. And that's recorded in Galatians chapter 3, verse 16. Consider then, how could Jesus Christ have lived ahead of Abraham since he is Abraham's seed, or
Because he wasn't always a man.
Abraham's descendant? So clearly then the YouTube commenter's understanding is in error. So what then did Christ mean? In what manner was he before Abraham? We turn to the writings this time of Apostle Peter.
Okay, dude, are you going to address any of the context in John 8? Like, you're going to First Peter, Galatians, later going to be Corinthians. Are you going to address anything in John 8, or just that one verse, and then go jump to random passages using random Bible translations to make it seem like that the Bible is teaching what you're saying here?
1 Peter 1:20, the Bible says, Christ was chosen, destined, foreknown before the world was made. The Bible explains that Christ is ahead of Abraham, not as a person, but in God's plan of creation.
So let's not waste our time with straw man argumentation. You cannot simply assume Unitarianism and then read it into the text of the Bible. You must prove Unitarianism in the same way I must prove Trinitarianism. You can't just assume.
Christ was already chosen, already destined, foreknown, planned by God, even before the world was made. So, since Christ was already in the mind of God even before the foundation of the world, but did not yet physically exist, when did God's plan to create Christ finally happen or come into fulfillment? For that, we turn to the answer of the Holy Bible, and that's recorded in the book of Galatians, chapter 4, verse 4, when it says, But when the fullness of the time had come, God sent forth his Son, born of a woman, born under the law. So only then, dear friends, when Christ was conceived and born of a woman named Mary, did he then come into existence as a person. Christ was the very first in God's plan of creation, yes, though he was not the first to be created by God. It's therefore in this biblical context that Christ's statement, before Abraham was, I am, should be understood. Christ was already in God's mind, in his plan of creation, even before Abraham was born. So clearly, he was before Abraham in that sense. Now, does the fact that Jesus was foreknown or was chosen by God before his birth mean that he was personally present with God since the beginning and therefore part of God or God the Son? Absolutely not. But why are we so sure about that? Consider, that's not even the only recorded instance of God planning or speaking of someone before they were born. For example, the prophet Jeremiah was already chosen by God before he was born. That's recorded in Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 5. But it does not mean, of course, that he had already existed with God. If then Jeremiah would not be considered God, of course, nobody would consider Jeremiah God, because of his existence being foreknown by God, why then would anyone then assume the same thing about Jesus? In fact, dear friends, even Christians were already chosen by God even before the foundation of the world. Where can we see that? Let's turn and let's read that. In Ephesians, the book of Ephesians, chapter 1, verses 4 and 5, it reads this way. Just as he chose us in him before the foundation of the world, that we should be holy and without blame before him in love, having predestined us to adoption as sons by Jesus Christ to himself, according to the good pleasure of his will. Therefore, dear friends, to insist then that Christ is God because of such foreknowledge would be also then to assert that all of us as Christians are gods as well. And of course, that's absurd.
I gotta take a break. I can't. I can't. What Trinitarian would argue that because Jesus was predetermined, therefore he existed before the foundation of the world? What?
So let's now address the other argument. Some are interpreting that by Christ saying the words, I am, he allegedly is saying he is God. Because God said, I am, in his as he was expressing his name in Exodus 3:14. So let's find out what is really written in that verse, Exodus 3:14. And God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, thus you shall say to the children of Israel, I am has sent me to you. So here people then simply draw the wrong conclusion that because God said, I am, and Jesus said, I am, in two very different instances, that means Christ and God are one and the same.
No. Okay. So in Exodus, God's name is I am. In John, Jesus says before everyone was, I am. And then he's on the verge of being stoned. It's not that difficult.
Is this interpretation the correct way to understand these verses? Now, if we will go along with the reasoning of some that Christ is God because he said, I am, then we once again run into a contradiction within the Bible. Because Christ is not the only one who said, I am. In John chapter 9, verse 9, we can read what the formerly blind man said when people questioned who he was. Let's read his response in chapter 9, verse 9. Some said, it is. But others said, no, he just looks like him. He said, I am.
Okay. So now you're really showing me that you did not read the context. You were just picking verses randomly. Let's just... Oh my gosh, I can't do this. Let's read the verse before that. Read verse 8. Therefore the neighbors and those who previously had seen that he was blind said, Is not this he who sat and begged? Then in verse 9 he says, I am he. Well, in my translation it says, I am he. You're picking a translation that says, I am, to make it sound like more that he's claiming to be God according to our logic, which I am he in my translation also shows up in Isaiah 46:3, I believe, which is another verse that's linked with Exodus 3:14 and John 8:58.
Now, does the fact that the formerly blind man said, I am, mean that he is God? Of course not. In fact, even Apostle Paul would then have to be given consideration as God because of what he said when describing himself in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 10. By the grace of God, I am what I am.
Okay. Just why? That's all I'm gonna ask. Just why are you doing this? Why am I doing this? Why am I subjecting myself to this? Why did I decide, hey, they made a video on one of my favorite proof texts of Jesus' deity. Why don't I respond? Oh, wait. This is Iglesia Ni Cristo. Okay. Read the verse, literally the same thing. The verse before that. Verse 9. For I am the least of the apostles, who am not worthy to be called an apostle, because I persecuted the church of God. Wow. And now, but by the grace of God, I am what I am. He's talking about being an apostle. It's clearly contextually there, but you can't contextually show that Jesus is not referring to himself as God. You cannot. You've went to 1 Peter and Galatians and Corinthians and all those other passages that have nothing to do with John 8 whatsoever and tried to somehow prove that Jesus is not claiming to be God here.
We're starting to see here, dear friends, that this simple line of reasoning used by some to prove Christ is God is a very, very weak argument.
Weak argument. That's very ironic coming from you.
A person describing himself by merely using similar words that God used does not make that person God.
So let's not waste our time with straw man argumentation.
So in the YouTube comment, when we read, so Jesus seems to think he was God, that would be a wrong interpretation of what Christ said, of course.
Okay. To both those commenters, absolute chads, jiggy chads. Well, bravo, well done. Keep doing what you're doing. Not you, Iglesia Ni Cristo, or Biblical Truth, whatever you want me to call me, One True Church, whatever. You're not the One True Church, by the way. Just stop. Just stop. Just stop. End your ministry. Stop making these videos. Read the Bible contextually, exegetically. Don't jump from verse to verse, cherry pick verses, cherry pick Bible translations, and then try to formulate some argument that Jesus is just a man. It's not working. I'm losing brain cells listening to you people try to actually argue these positions. Just stop. Just please stop.